The week ahead is one in which the Rand will probably be able to stabilize and may even be able to appreciate. If we take a step back, a month ago, almost exactly, the Fed meeting saw emerging market currencies, including the Rand, come under significant pressure. We then had another bout of pressure on the Rand, obviously relating to the domestic unrest. At the end of last week, Friday particularly, but even on Thursday, we saw the Rand regain a lot of the losses on the local unrest. At this stage, probably most of that recovery has been done. The Rand still has a small premium over other emerging market currencies that it can still gather. Nevertheless, the first pressure, the Fed, the weakness that resulted from the Fed remains in the Rand, and so the dollar Rand trading well above the 14 level. That's not going to change, at least not this week. The week after this, we have a Fed meeting. A very dovish Fed would maybe let that Rand break under 14 once again. In terms of data and events this week, it's a relatively light calendar. We have two big events. We have the ECB and the SARB both on Thursday, and a relatively light calendar, which I'll touch on in a moment. The ECB and the SARB sound like big events, but in both cases, they're going to be keeping policy unchanged, and it's really about the wording. So significant market moves are probably unlikely. In the case of the ECB, now that they've changed their target, they have to update their wording on their forward guidance. Market will be looking at that issue specifically, but also more generally to see the balance between the hawks and the doves, which have become more apparent. In terms of the SARB, again, policy unchanged. The market, however, is pricing aggressive rate hikes towards the end of the year. Is that something the SARB is going to push back a little bit against? Remember, their own QPM model also has been forecasting rate hikes. In terms of the data this week, we have SA CPI. That's not going to influence the Rand significantly, but can impact, of course, onto the fixed income markets. There we're looking for a 4.7% figure, marginally below what the consensus view is for. On Friday, we have PMI figures out of the Eurozone. These are important, not on the level of non-farm payrolls or US CPI, but can be considered a top-tier release. Generally, the theme here is that we are seeing growth across the globe in the manufacturing sector decelerate. And what we're hoping for is an acceleration in the services side of the economy. So focus very much on the two PMI figures, manufacturing versus services. Hopefully the services now taking up the slack from the manufacturing sector. On the local front, there remains the risk of further unrest, particularly as ex-President Zuma appears in court once again on Monday. Sporadic outbreaks are probably likely, but generally we are almost certainly past the worst, and hopefully this dies away. Also on a South African front, looking at COVID figures, it's been a little bit surprising to me, but it now appears that COVID cases have peaked in 8 of our 9 provinces. Why it's a surprise? Yes, Gauteng was peaking, that was expected, but the other provinces have turned a lot faster, certainly, than I had expected. That's relatively good news. Hopefully now cases fall off very rapidly, as they did in the previous waves. The signs there are not so good from the early leaders, Free State and the Northern Cape. When they peaked, that was around 2 to 3 weeks before Gauteng. In those cases, it didn't drop away significantly, just dropped away slowly, remains at relatively high levels. A situation akin to what happened in Europe in their third wave, very long, prolonged third wave that just lingers. Finally, it's worth also mentioning some positives for South Africa. Hopefully, by the time when you view this video, South Africa are COSAFA soccer champions. And then this week, of course, we also have the Springboks playing against the British and Irish Lions. Hopefully another victory for South Africa there. Just some good news relative to the negative views, obviously coming with the unrest over the past week and a half. In all, a relatively quiet week. Hopefully that brings some stability to the Rand. And with the Rand still having a premium because of the unrest, the bias is for slight Rand appreciation. Moves through 14 seem very unlikely before the Fed. Good luck in the week ahead.